crony capitalism isn't real. It's a made-up term. It's a term that's used by some centrists, but mostly on the right, to hand-wave away the failures and excesses and contradictions of capitalism. Crony capitalism is the logical conclusion of capitalism. Crony capitalism is what capitalists want. It's what they aspire to. It's capitalism. There is no such thing as crony capitalism. People will often say, well, you know, companies in a perfect system will always compete, and then the best companies will succeed, and those companies will provide goods and services that the public wants and needs, and that over time the market will balance itself, and that we need no regulations or very few regulations, and that when we see the failures of our current capitalist system, it's a result of those regulations meddling. It's a result of things like regulatory capture. It's a result of, you know, the intertwining of business elite with the government elite, and them passing laws that benefit their industry or their firm in particular, you know, and that's the hand wave away. They're basically trying to create a distinction of capitalism that sort of takes up sort of the pack mule for all of capitalism's failures, so that they can keep the term capitalism kind of pristine and clean and idealized. But that's wrong. That's wrong. The reality is that capitalism is not a system of exchange so much as it is a system of production. In our current discourse today, in much of the free world, in much of the Western world, if you will, capitalism has been associated with things like markets. That a market society is a capitalist society. That you can't have markets without capitalism, and you can't have capitalism without markets. And this isn't to say that capitalism doesn't operate on market principles, at least in some cases. But it is to say that the goal of capitalism, and the goal of capitalists, is not to produce a market society. It's to produce wealth for those who own the capital. And that's the overwhelming goal. So at times, especially with, say, very small businesses, you know, the capitalist system and the market system coincide. The capitalist, their goal is to make a profit, and to do that they have to operate within certain market metrics. They have to provide a good or service that is in demand, and they have to provide it at a price that they can command an adequate supply of that demand. If they can't do that, they'll go out of business, or they'll have to change things. And, you know, if there are a lot of small businesses, they can't, you know, on an individual basis, you know, mess the system up. They can't, you know, monopolize or oligopolize the system. That's the form of capitalism you're taught in Economics 101 in university or high school or what have you. But that's not actually how it works. Capitalism at its logical function is about using whatever means you can to extract as much wealth from the consumers and your workers as is possible. So at times, companies will rely on the market to do that. They'll use market systems. They'll push for deregulation. They'll push for trade liberalization. They'll push for some of these things that you could associate with a market economy. But at other times, capitalists will do the exact opposite. They'll push for regulatory capture. They'll push for ways that protect their monopolies or protect their oligopolies. They'll enter an industry when it was very easy to enter, and then kind of pull up the ladder so that competitors can't rise, or competitors can't rise as easily. That's the tool. Because here again is the factor here. Capitalists individually and capitalists as a collective have no interest in competition generally. They have no interests in freedom generally. Their interests are, above all, the protection and expansion of their private property. And often, you know, the ideals of capitalism, the supposed ideals, are in direct contradiction. You're an owner of a company, let's say. Say it's a publicly traded corporation. Your goal isn't to promote capitalism as a kind of ideology of freedom. You have one goal and one goal only: to maximize shareholder value. You know? And if you can do that through the market, you will, I suppose. But if you can do that through, what is called quote-unquote crony capitalism, you'll do that. That's your goal. You can maximize shareholder value through providing a good or service better, but you can also do it by getting the government to pass certain laws that benefit you and companies like you, or that attack your competitors, that put up tariffs or what have you. And that's the reality. Capitalism will inevitably always trend towards what people call crony capitalism. Because if we operate under the assumption that, if we have a bunch of small firms that are competing against one another, eventually some of those firms will become much more successful than others. And success in a capitalist economy is like a snowball rolling down a hill. There's often the ability to kind of build on that momentum. And that gives you an ability to control much more of the marketplace. And to kind of use your power, use your clout, use your market share, use your economies of scale to rig the game in your favor going forward. I know a good example is net neutrality. A lot of people were saying, well, net neutrality is important because it preserves the free market of ideas on the internet, and net neutrality, these companies are attacking capitalism, they're attacking the free market, they're attacking the ideals of free enterprise when they attack net neutrality. And that's wrong, though. I mean, I support net neutrality, but the reason you support net neutrality isn't because it's capitalist, it's because it actually challenges the assumptions of capitalism. Those companies, the internet service providers, massive telecommunication firms, fighting freedom on the internet is beneficial to them. Their success under capitalism is predicated in part on the limiting of your freedom. And therein lies the distinction. Because when a company succeeds by promoting their private property and promoting their interests over yours, it's never about freedom. It's about domination. So I just want people to recognize that. Capitalism is not a system of freedom. It's not a system of democracy. It's not a system of liberty. It's not a system of markets. It can, in limited terms, include any one of those things. Although as a democratic socialist, I would argue that none of those things are fully possible under capitalism. Capitalism at its core is a system of subjugation, of domination, of inequality, and of autocracy. And there's no way around that. So I don't want to see, progressives especially, back into a corner when they get challenged by right-wingers and saying, well, what's wrong with capitalism? And you might say, well, it's the crony part that bothers me. I support pure capitalism. And I don't want progressives to let up when they're challenging right-wingers saying, well, why has capitalism failed here? Why has it failed there? What about the logical, failures of capitalism? And then when they say, oh, well, that's just crony capitalism, push the envelope. Let them know that that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is the elite, the owners of capital, using any means possible, legal or illegal, violent or not. Because again, they will kill. Capitalists have killed workers domestically, and they've supported coups abroad in the promotion of their profits and their property. They haven't stopped doing it. Workers aren't getting shot in the streets of Canada and the United States as much as they were 150 years ago, sure. But violence by capitalists, state violence, the use of state force against workers and against people of the developing world to promote profits and property is still alive and well. So I want you on the left to make the case that capitalism needs to go. It is not a system of freedom. Crony capitalism isn't real. It is capitalism.